The next item of business is a Stage 1 debate on Motion 23564 in the name of Paul Wheelhouse on the Heat Network Scotland Bill. Can I ask all those who wish to speak in the debate to press the request to speak buttons? And I call on Paul Wheelhouse to speak to and move the motion for up to 11 minutes, please, Minister.
Thank you, Presiding Officer, for the opportunity to address the Chamber today on the general principles of the Heat Network Scotland Bill. I'm delighted to open the debate on this bill and to have reached this point in the process. I'd like to thank the Economy, Energy and Fair Work Committee for its careful scrutiny of the bill, and I welcome its recommendation to approve the general principles of the bill. I'd also like to express my gratitude to the organisations and individuals who've given evidence, the convener and members of the Delegated Powers and Law Reform Committee, as well as the Heat Networks Regulation Working Group, which was a strong source of support to us in preparing this bill. But before I talk about the bill itself, I think it will be beneficial for members in the Chamber and remotely if I briefly set out what a heat network is, how it differs from the heating systems we're more familiar with in Scotland, and the benefits it can bring. Put simply, a heat network is a distribution system of insulated pipes that carry hot water or steam from a central source and delivers it to homes and businesses. Heat networks are best deployed in denser, more built-up areas and more concentrated demand for heat, but they can and do work well in rural contexts as well. They are well-known technology across Europe, predominantly but not exclusively in large cities, such as Copenhagen, where they supply heat to 98% of all existing buildings. And heat networks are generally more efficient than individual gas boilers, and in the right circumstances can deliver fuel savings, helping to lower bills and tackle fuel poverty. The heat can come from a wide range of renewable and low-carbon sources, including large-scale heat pumps in our rivers, or even waste heat recovered from industrial processes like whisky distillation. There are health and safety benefits too, as there's no need for any combustion to take place inside the building, thereby avoiding fire risks and carbon monoxide poisoning risks, for example. And as heat networks are long-lived assets, they can create long-term local jobs in their maintenance and administration. So as you can see, heat networks, when deployed in suitable areas, have many benefits, and the most important of which may be their capacity to remove the emissions caused by heating our buildings and to reduce bills, helping to tackle fuel poverty. The Committee on Climate Change, along with other key actors in this sector, has advised us that there is real scope for making far greater use of renewable and low-carbon heat networks. And with the opportunity this technology presents, the overall aim of the bill is to accelerate the development of heat networks in Scotland and in turn drive down emissions and to tackle fuel poverty. Now, the bill seeks to do this by creating a new licensing regime to ensure operators are solvent, fit and proper, while driving up standards across the sector as well. Introducing new processes for consenting, zoning and permitting to ensure that new networks are developed where they will have most benefit, are tailored to the needs of an area and can provide greater certainty to developers and investors to attract investment. Levelling the playing field with other utilities by creating new rights for heat network developers and operators, helping to reduce the costs and risks associated with construction. And finally, by putting in place arrangements to protect network users by enabling a transfer of operational rights to occur to ensure continued supply. The bill and its provisions have been developed following extensive consultation with stakeholders and communities, including our island communities, and are based on advice and recommendations from an expert working group of stakeholders. Presiding Officer, the Economy, Energy and Fair Work Committee has made helpful recommendations throughout its report, and I have responded to the committee in what I trust is an equally helpful manner. This is a lengthy and complex bill, so I'll concentrate on covering four important areas the committee's Stage 1 report rightly addresses, and these are consumer protection, fuel poverty, community engagement and the division of responsibilities between local and national government. But of course, I will also listen very carefully to points which members make today in the Chamber and remotely in all areas of this bill. And if the bill is passed to Stage 2, I intend to write to members across the Chamber so that I can hear the views of Parliament in further detail. As I said from the outset, I'd like this to be a collaborative process that we can produce a piece of legislation we can all be proud of, and I'm confident we can and will do that. Firstly, the committee has highlighted the challenges in relation to consumer protection, which, as the Chamber is aware, is not currently within the competence of the Scottish Parliament. I very much welcome the committee's scrutiny of this issue and can reassure the Chamber that we're not enabling the mass deployment of these schemes without the commensurate protection for homes and businesses. Earlier this year, the UK Government signalled its intention to legislate to introduce a set of consumer standards for the sector, which will apply across Great Britain. This is very welcome. I continue to work closely with UK counterparts to ensure that these proposals are fit for Scotland. I've written to Kwasi Kwarteng MP, Minister of State for Business, Energy and Clean Growth, seeking new powers for Scottish ministers to determine which body oversees these consumer standards in Scotland. And this would ensure that the body, be it Ofgem or another organisation, is one and the same as the licensing authority created by this bill. In this way, we will achieve coherent regulation in Scotland, while also harmonising standards for businesses and consumers across the borders. I will.
Graham Simpson.
Thank you. It's very, very quick. Does the Minister think that Ofgem would be the appropriate body?
Paul Wheelhouse.
I can certainly say to the member we are very supportive of Ofgem providing this role. Obviously, it's not within our gift at this moment to appoint a body which is constituted in UK statute as the body, and that's why we're seeking to work with UK ministers to have the powers to be able to do that in this Parliament, to appoint Ofgem in that role. So we're very supportive. We have had early discussions with Ofgem and believe they're supportive of performing that role. Presiding Officer, I hope to have a response by today for this debate. I apologise, I don't, waiting a response from Mr Kwarteng, but that I don't read anything into that. I think it's just a bandwidth issue perhaps at this moment in time, but we'll continue to keep the committee and Parliament updated as we progress. Meanwhile, I hope that members will agree with me that the bill improves on the current situation by regulating the market for the first time and enabling conditions of licence and consent to be placed on operators and on individual sites. I'll now turn to the important issue of fuel poverty, which has rightly been raised by the committee report. Heat networks have an important role to play in helping to eradicate fuel poverty. The Business and Regulatory Impact Assessment, or BRIA, accompanying the bill notes that in the right circumstances, heat networks can provide average fuel savings of 17% for households, and in the right circumstances can deliver savings of up to 36%. So I recognise that the bill does not make explicit reference to fuel poverty, but I can assure the Chamber that contributing to the eradication of fuel poverty has been an absolute priority for the Scottish Government as we have developed this bill. To put this beyond all doubt, I am proposing to bring forward amendments at stage 2 to parts 1, 2 and 3 of the bill to ensure that the consideration of fuel poverty is embedded throughout the bill explicitly. And my officials and I are liaising with the Chair of the Scottish Fuel Poverty Partnership Forum and with Energy Action Scotland to inform these amendments. Should the bill pass, I'll continue to work with fuel poverty stakeholders to ensure that the regulatory framework, as it is further developed and implemented, helps to tackle fuel poverty. Presiding Officer, the committee has recommended that the bill include stronger provision for community engagement. I have also reflected on this and recognise that the bill could be strengthened to ensure that the views and needs of local communities are accounted for, and to ensure that local views are considered from the very inception of a potential project. I will bring forward an amendment at stage 2, which will require developers to provide real evidence of their engagement with local communities alongside their application for a heat network consent. As we develop subsequent regulations in this area, it will be important for us to draw on the expertise and insight of communities and organisations such as Citizens Advice Scotland, and I commit to working with them as we progress work in this area. Presiding Officer, I note the committee's recommendation for the balance of powers between Scottish ministers and local government to be modified over time. As introduced, the bill makes Scottish ministers responsible for approving new heat network developments through the consenting system. And I want to be clear, this will not undermine the role of local authorities, but rather the intention is to ensure proportionality by not requiring local authorities to take on this function at this time while the heat network sector is still developing and when such systems will not have equal distribution across the country. And secondly, to make use of the existing capacity the Scottish Government has within the Energy Consents Unit, which already performs a similar function in approving new renewable generation and electricity transmission projects. This would enable us to realise the economies of scale and to proceed as quickly as possible in approving new schemes in view of the global climate emergency. I believe the committee's recommendation on this issue is a very sensible and practical one, and I agree that local authorities should be empowered as far as possible, particularly in the case of heat networks, which are local assets by their nature. I will therefore introduce a government amendment at stage 2 to enable responsibility for the award of heat network consents to be transferred to local authorities in future, but also allowing local authorities to take the decision to suit their circumstances. They can leave that responsibility with Scottish ministers should they choose to do so. Of course, Presiding Officer, this bill is only one part of our work to tackle fuel poverty and reduce emissions from Scotland's homes and buildings. We have the most ambitious and comprehensive fuel poverty legislation and retrofit programmes in the UK, and we are committed to investing £1.6 billion over the next Parliament to expand and accelerate our heat and energy efficiency programmes as part of a green recovery. We've already launched a £50 million Green Recovery Low Carbon Infrastructure Transition Programme call, and will invest £25 million in heat networks as part of the Clyde mission. This year, we are also providing £20 million in funding to social landlords to improve their properties, helping them to make them warmer and greener. And last month, in addition to opening a £4 million renewable heat cashback scheme for SMEs, I announced a new £4.5 million cashback incentive to help people install renewable and energy efficiency measures in their homes. We will shortly publish a consultation on our 2024 standard for new buildings, requiring them to only use zero-emissions heat. This will open up a new market opportunity for the renewable heating sector and will be an important step forward in encouraging the connection of new buildings to heat networks. And we will shortly publish our heat and building strategy for Scotland, setting out our vision for the rollout of energy efficiency and enhancing heat decarbonisation in Scotland as well. The heat and building strategy will set out an ambitious set of new actions that will accelerate the decarbonisation of our building stock. And this will include new commitments to support the deployment of heat networks, and I encourage all members to consider this important document closely when it is published. In conclusion, Presiding Officer, I hope I've demonstrated to colleagues and yourself today that the Heat Network Scotland Bill will play a crucial role within our package of programmes as we take steps to ensure that Scotland's buildings are warmer, greener and more efficient. In conclusion, Presiding Officer, I believe the bill is an important step in supporting the deployment of heat networks at the scale which is needed to help us reach our net zero carbon targets. The bill will provide confidence for consumers, investors and the supply chain, creating a sustainable market for district heating. So I commend the bill to Parliament, and I move the motion that the Parliament agrees to the general principles of the Heat Network Scotland Bill.
Thank you. I now call on Gordon Lyndhurst on behalf of the Economy, Energy and Fair Work Committee for up to 8 minutes, please.
Thank you, Deputy Presiding Officer. Heat networks are hardly a new idea. The first modern district heating system was pioneered in a town in the state of New York in 1877. Birdsall Hawley, a friend of Thomas Edison, observed the abundance of thermal energy in urban areas, and he realized heat from industrial processes could be piped into homes to meet public demand. Waste not, want not. A triumph of the free market, you might say. But of course, this is a committee report, and I couldn't possibly comment. The Scottish Government presented us with a doorstop of a bill. It extends to 85 sections and 42 pages, and I am pleased to say our Stage 1 report is 2 pages shorter. In the words of Horace, whatever advice you give, be brief. But it is pleasing that the ministers heeded so much of our advice. I think it's fair to say we're not always familiar with the words. The Scottish Government accepts the committee's recommendations, but credit where credit's due. The phrase appears in almost double figures in Mr. Wheelhouse's written response to us, and he and his officials are to be commended for taking such a constructive approach. This is a technical bill with substantial delegated powers. In broad terms, it seeks to regulate the supply of thermal energy via heat networks. It has a single purpose. But that single purpose covers a plethora of policy areas: energy efficiency, renewables, land rights, planning, and climate change included. I want to focus on just a handful of matters highlighted in our scrutiny. The first and most fundamental, and which also featured in our energy inquiry, is public engagement. The Committee on Climate Change has advised the Scottish Government to prioritise behaviour change. Our committee agrees. We too want it to take the lead by example to facilitate new social norms. To address the disconnect between public support for carbon reduction and a lack of awareness of the role of heat. To ensure community buy-in, consumer confidence in what you might term social licence. Citizens Advice Scotland saw the intentions of the bill as admirable, but said, and I quote, "It could go further to guarantee good outcomes for consumers." They cited the experience of one community in northwest Glasgow, an area where more than 90 households had their heat turned off after accruing arrears. The provider, having put up its price, but failed to appreciate the vulnerability of these customers, which is why We need a clearer commitment to local input in the growth and development of heat networks, which I think the Minister recognises. This must be at the heart of this bill, central to its ethos. So we welcome the Minister saying that developers should provide a community engagement report, and the indication that he will bring forward an amendment to stipulate that in the bill. Again, we credit him with taking such a positive stance. His agreement that fuel poverty should be put on the face of the bill, as a number of witnesses wanted. The Nordic experience, if we may call it that, notably in Denmark and Norway, is acknowledged as an influence on this bill. In other circumstances, we'd like to have seen the results of that experience for ourselves, but due to current circumstances, coronavirus, of which you will all have heard and experienced, sadly, we were grateful, however, to the Danish Energy Agency for providing us with a written submission in the absence of the opportunity of a site visit. The Danes described heat networks as a, quote, low-regret investment, one that is, quote, agnostic to the heat source, and also adaptable to technological developments, be that waste heat, hydrogen, or something else. Municipalities in Denmark, something the Minister touched on, oversee the consents process for heat networks, and together with consumer cooperatives, they largely own the networks. The balance of power between the national and the local in this bill is certainly not the same. We feel it would be desirable if it was able to be modified over time, and yet again, the Minister accepts our recommendation because he recognises that local authorities should be empowered as far as possible, where willing and able. He also accepts that heat networks are essentially local assets and says that he'll seek to amend the bill, as he's indicated, I think, on a number of occasions, and to enable the future transfer of consents to councils. I might offer the Minister even more compliments, but my concern is I'm already in excess of my quota. So I'll move on. A question, Deputy Presiding Officer. What's on the wallpaper today? I am told this is what a Dane asks. I don't know if this is true or not, to be fair. This is what they ask when they want to know what's on the agenda. So what's left on my wallpaper? I shall cover a robust critique of some of the bill's drafting. For we heard detailed evidence in relation to way leaves, legal definitions, and the creation of real rights. Professor Roddy Paisley, who specialises in land law, and he impressed even Andy Whiteman. We'll no doubt hear Andy's comments shortly. He made observations on various aspects of the bill, and here are just a few, and I quote parts of these comments. Somewhat oddly drafted and lacks clarity. I think it will be overly sanguine to expect the builder's shovel to conform in every or even most situations with the lawyer's pen. A half-baked import. In Scotland, we can do better than this. And lastly, for my part quotes from him, it would not be a good idea to model what you propose to do in the bill on what is already in legislation drafted by the Westminster Parliament. Well, it was an interesting contribution, and one we felt ought to be stress-tested with another academic. We then presented both sets of views to the Scottish Government. And did the Minister respond in a defensive or derisory way? No. I'm almost dismayed to say that he did not. He describes the views as, quotes, valuable. He believes it is, quotes, crucial to consider the transparency of way leave rights, and he says he will seek to amend the bill to address such issues. Heat networks are hardly a new idea, Deputy Presiding Officer, but a minister who listens? Now, that is an innovation. So we recommend the general principles of the bill and that they be agreed to. Thank you.
I now call on Alexander Burnett for up to 7 minutes, please.
Thank you, Deputy Presiding Officer. It's very welcome to finally be here deliberating legislation to advance heat networks in Scotland, though I feel it's been a long time coming. So long, in fact, that I had to check when the subject was first raised in the Parliament, and that honour falls to Sarah Boyack back in 2003. For my own part, and in a declaration of my interest, I started building heat networks back in 2007. Now, I'm a firm believer that all members should bring real-life experience into Parliament, but I'm going to guess I may be in the minority who have literally been in the trenches of district heating. Unfortunately, I don't believe a minister and his team have built a heat network, and that is perhaps reflected in some parts of the bill, which I'll come to later. However, the principle of this bill is to encourage greater use of heat networks, is a welcome one, and I hope when passed it will encourage the development of heat networks. And so far, Scotland's performance has been woeful, only hitting half of its target of heat produced by renewables. But we do, however, welcome the elements addressing consumer protection and the wish of both the committee and the minister to use Ofgem, which is seen as the Rolls-Royce of regulation in an emerging market. We also have no issue with the many technical definitions. There are, however, a number of concerns, and they fall into two clear parts. The first is existing schemes, of which there is no mention. And as an aside, I find it extremely concerning, as the exact quantum of schemes and consumers is not known, with figures given as 800 schemes and possibly 20,000 consumers. Though in a written answer to Tom Arthur on the 29th of October, the Minister said this was nearly 30,000. And this seems to be a very large discrepancy, and a large number to be overlooked by any bill. Now, the Minister says that existing schemes will be covered by proposed UK legislation. And however, there is a concern about whether they will be covered in the same way as this bill will cover them, and what happens until that UK legislation is passed. Furthermore, many schemes are also continuing to expand, and so I'd be grateful if a minister will be able to make clear whether any expansion of an existing scheme will require a licence. And further to that, how that any existing part of a scheme not covered by this bill will then interact with a part of a scheme that will now be covered by the UK legislation. There is a vague assurance from the Minister that the bill will not have a disproportionate impact on existing schemes, but clarity on these points would be most welcome. Now, on new schemes, I'd like to focus on two areas which demonstrate a lack of knowledge of the sector. The first is around the identity of the supplier of last resort, which the Scottish Government views as a key outcome of the bill. The suggestion is that as part of a licensing requirement, an operator would have a third party obligated to take over and ensure continuous operation of the scheme. Now, this is a welcome consumer protection, but we must look at how that would work in practice. The third-party supplier of last resort, who one assumes is already a licence holder, and therefore a competitor to the existing operator, would have to give an obligation to step in to take over a scheme in the event of insolvency or another failure of supply. Now, leaving aside the issues of insolvency and creditors' claims on a network assets, this obligation by a third party has a financial risk, which would sit on its own balance sheet and would therefore require the constant due diligence of a competitor's financial and physical performance of a heating network. Now, aside from the commercial confidentiality aspects, the cost of this could also be prohibitive, or worse, passed on to consumers, with negative consequences for fuel poverty. So again, I'd be grateful if a minister is going to be able to give clarity on the detail of this aspect, or is he saying that the Scottish Government will always be this supplier of last resort? Now, the second aspect requiring further explanation is around heat zones. There are physical and practical components of a heat network that complicate this element. As a brief explanation, the generating building, fuel store, and emerging pipework sizes must all be calculated and sized accordingly at the outset of a project. And while some additional capacity can be added and distributed, it is not nearly as straightforward as expanding an electrical or gas network, which much of the bill appears to be based on. A heat network's available capacity, and even the location of that capacity around the network, is not straightforward and subject to change with every new connection. The idea that new buildings in a designated area can simply connect is sadly fantasy. One new building may well have a completely different heat load to another, requiring physical and therefore financial differences in both pipe size and the hydraulic interface unit or heat exchanger. And this all means varying connection charges. Building users, if I can have a time, yeah, certainly.
Paul Wheelhouse.
Thank you, Presiding Officer, and thank the member for taking intervention. Just on the issue, he rightly identifies the issue. We obviously need to understand accurately what the heat load would be, the demand load would be, building by building. We do recognise, I appreciate as a first step, we're looking at using the public sector buildings to produce building assessment reports to inform LHEs and to give accuracy of data. So hopefully we will have, for anchor loads, for at least from public buildings, be able to give investors confidence that there's sufficient demand to justify the investment.
Alexander Burnett.
Thank you. And I welcome that reply. I also like for the record to welcome the Minister's offer and previous conversations to be as constructive on this bill as possible. He mentions existing loads and these are subject to change, which I'll touch on now. What I'm saying is you can have varying connection charges which might not be known at the outset, but building users may also change with different heat demands, leading to obvious implications for the operator. A shed with a micro distillery has a very different heat profile than if it changes to being used for storage only. And the same could apply to the public sector buildings that the Minister just referred to. Their uses may change over time. And all of this leads to issues over connecting and charging obligations for both the operator and the potential consumer that do not appear to have been given any meaningful consideration. Now, there is on some other points, there is a significant issue of how local authorities will resource their new heat zoning obligations with funding and the specialist skills needed. And I know other colleagues which will speak on this, but for my part, I hope we're not going down the familiar route of the Scottish Government devolving responsibility without the matching resource. Other submissions raise the point that the bill is based on a single entity and operator schemes, whereas multi-operator schemes are quite normal, and so clarity is also required on licence holding requirements. Similar questions were raised regarding the revocation or refusal of a licence, the transfer of assets process, the valuation and compensation mechanisms, and most worryingly, the lack of an appeals process. So in conclusion, I hope that the Minister will significantly improve his knowledge of how such systems are built and do everything in his power to ensure his legacy is not the death knell to consumers and developers of heating networks. But despite the many reservations with the bill, it must become one that will increase heat networks and protect consumers. So it must be welcomed, and we will be supporting it at stage one. Thank you.
Now call Claudia Beamish, who's joining us remotely for 6 minutes, please.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. Thank you to Paul Wheelhouse for bringing the Heat Network Scotland Bill forward. I welcome the bill as an opportunity to address concerns around the sector and move towards decarbonising heat. It is also an opportunity to lift thousands of families out of fuel poverty. I leave the committee members speaking today to outline the recommendations which we support at this important stage one debate. I am pleased to open the debate for Scottish Labour, and we will support the bill proposals at stage one, but we believe that it has so much more potential. We face a climate emergency, and heat from buildings accounts for a quarter of Scotland's climate emissions. Yet none of the statistics around renewable heat in Scotland seem to match the urgency. The progress in this area has been far too slow so far. The target of 11% seems quite measly for our current climate change emergency and understanding, and the fact that it has been missed is disappointing. Heat networks must and can be part of a transition to a net zero society, but with estimates of between 7 and 17% of Scotland's heat demand from renewable networks, this is not enough. This will not drive the large-scale changes needed to tackle the climate crisis. We need ambitious targets for a green recovery. It is notable that the committee in their recommendations has, I quote, to reflect on whether its ambitions for the impact of the bill are on a level with those already set out for tackling climate change and pursuing a green recovery. This needs further attention and consideration must be given to WWF's recommendation that targets are included in the bill, along with a clear delivery plan, but should not just be in guidance. There is certainly consensus that heat networks are a way forward as part of a mixed renewable energy solution. However, for this sector to be a success, there are a number of factors that must all come together, and I'm listening carefully, as well as making some points today. This legislation is an opportunity to drive up consumer confidence, and we know it is a significant barrier to developers and uplift. A regulated sector with robust licensing, service standards, and consumer protection will, of course, improve confidence. Developers and investors are reluctant to take risk without measures that create licence holders with statutory powers similar to those of other utility providers. And the committee in their report has asked to see a clearer commitment to consumer protection, and this is a view supported by the Ombudsman Service. I would ask that there is consideration in the bill the prospect of if a customer enters into a heat network without the ability to switch a supplier, what is to happen? And that is a point that I hope that will be addressed by the Minister and by the committee as we go forward. Having more information about service, customer engagement, maximum standards, price information, etc. as conditions of a licence in the main body of the bill may well be a way to ensure that protection. And a coordinated approach from local government and Scottish Government is necessary, as we've heard from other members today. The Energy Saving Trust acknowledged the role of the local authorities as a priority in its report, Scotland's Renewable Heat Future, from 2011. While the bill will look at the role of local authorities, there is a lack of reference to community engagement, and this aspect must be given greater priority. Again, the committee recognised. Advice and funding is also critical to ensure that councils have the capacity and knowledge to develop municipal or community or cooperative not-for-profit heat network companies. And I welcome the Minister's commitment on these areas. Consideration must be given to a just transition as well, and to ensuring that the skills and knowledge are in place to respond and expand this sector. This includes the skills to develop technology, install and maintain it. Given the benefits that this could bring in reducing domestic fuel costs, it is a relief that the Minister has today agreed that fuel poverty will be on the face. In Drammen, Norway, district heating via a heat pump delivers the city's collective heating needs using fields as a resource. The system is 50% owned by a commercial company, excuse me, and 50% owned by a municipal company. Indeed, in many European countries, there has long been district heating networks. And these are embedded in the culture with no concerns about a lack of individual control, because people work together on this. We must recognise that as we develop networks here in Scotland, there must be support and clear information for our communities. What's encouraging for the development of our manufacturing base in relation to heat networks is that with a Scottish company, Star Renewables, which I know the Minister and others have visited, that made the Drammen system possible. There is so much to be positive about in this bill. If the gaps are addressed, it will fully grasp the local, national and global benefit that it offers. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And I call on Andy Whiteman to for the Green Party. Up to 5 minutes, Mr Whiteman.
Thanks very much indeed, Presiding Officer. And Scottish Greens do welcome this bill. And I want to thank the clerks, all those who give evidence to the committee. And I also want to, as the convener did himself in his opening remarks, thank the Minister for his constructive engagement and positive response in Stage 1 report. Scotland, of course, as we know, is a northern country. It's wet and cold for much of the year, and we have a persistent problem with fuel poverty. We need to keep warm. I was lucky enough some years ago to visit the Soviet Union on a number of occasions, and one year I was skiing in Siberia when I encountered quite substantial, interesting heat networks, vast pipes snaking across the cities with leaks of warm air condensing in huge clouds in the streets. But the homes of Soviet citizens were warm, even in the most hostile climate on Earth. And that's not unusual. Many European countries, indeed most European countries, certainly all Northern European countries, have long embraced heat networks. And the bill's development in terms of policy has drawn on the experience of a number of these countries. So the Heat Networks Bill is a welcome one and an important step to addressing Scotland's energy needs. We know how little time we have to address the climate crisis, and of course making our heating systems more efficient and climate friendly is one of the key challenges that faces us together with transport and land use. The committee has, of course, identified a large list of areas where improvements could be made. And again, I want to thank Mr Wheelhouse for his constructive response to the committee's recommendations, and I just want to reflect on a few of them. First of all, the function of tackling fuel poverty has been suggested should be on the face of the bill as an objective and criteria for the regulatory process and the awarding of consents, and I welcome the Government's agreement on this point. Look forward to debating the formulation of words to achieve that. Secondly, and this is the Scottish Greens' principal concern, the bill centralises power with Scottish Government ministers. Now, much of the evidence from the Scottish Government in relationship to this bill did in fact draw heavily on the Danish model of heat networks. And as the convener mentioned in his opening remarks, the Danish Energy Agency did provide very useful written evidence to the committee. And I have it here, and they talk about, under the key elements of heat networks, that municipalities, that's to say local authorities, have mandated responsible authority for heat planning and approval of heat projects. It goes on to say that the pipe network for distribution and transmission of heat is owned predominantly by municipalities, 2/3 of it, while consumer-owned co-ops own most of the remainder. And it goes on to say a very important feature of the Danish heat network system is the concept of the not-for-profit requirement, and that's been part of heat networks regulation since heat planning became a municipal responsibility. The not-for-profit requirement stipulates that heat network companies can only charge the consumers a price equal to the actual or necessary costs of producing and transporting the heat. Profit is deemed an unnecessary cost. So whilst the private sector, I no doubt, played a useful role in New York, it shows that municipal enterprise can equally play a productive role in heating our homes. And so I'm pleased the Government's agreed to amend the bill to allow for the future transfer of regulatory functions to local authorities, but I do believe it should go further. Cabinet Secretary Aileen Campbell said in Local Government Committee yesterday that, and I quote, "We are committed to local decision-making. In my view, the bill should presume as a default that local government be the competent authority, unless it decides not to be. Local authorities may, of course, in such a scenario, decide that they wish the Scottish Government to perform the relevant functions on their behalf, or they may decide to share services and expertise with neighbouring local authorities as they do now. Presiding Officer, public engagement has also been mentioned, and certainly in relation to what will be a dramatic change in infrastructure and how we heat our homes. In the absence of a formal role for communities and local authorities in terms of planning and consent, a robust plan for engaging and taking feedback from relevant individuals is important, and again I welcome the Government's response to that. And finally, significant evidence on the legal and drafting of the section on way leaves was heard, and the convener mentioned a few of those. Professor Paisley told us that section 60 needs, I quote, wholesale redrafting, and that references to the words owner and occupier are English-inspired nonsense. I should just say that it's very, very good when witnesses come before committees and tell us exactly what they think. And as the convener said, the committee is very interested and keen to see that evidence tested properly. And we did so by inviting Scott Wortley, who was, I think, the committee advisor on the drafting of the Title Conditions Bill in 2003, which Professor Paisley said was one of the Scottish Parliament's finest legislative achievements. So finally, we touched on issues around building regulations and the green recovery and all the rest of it. But, Presiding Officer, I'll leave it there and confirm that the Scottish Green Party will be supporting this bill at stage 1. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr Whiteman. And I call Liam MacArthur to open for Liberal Democrats. Up to 5 minutes, please.
Thanks very much, Deputy Presiding Officer. I'm hoping that you might actually grant Andy Whiteman a closing remark so he can explain why he was on special manoeuvres skiing in Siberia. But like others, can I thank the Economy Committee for their work on this bill and those who have given evidence. And also, in light of the comments from the convener and Andy Whiteman, also thank Paul Wheelhouse for his characteristically, I think, constructive engagement with the committee on this. I was also delighted to see the committee manage to visit Orkney as part of their evidence gathering, always to be encouraged, and I'm sure this did help inform the recommendations in the Stage 1 report. Indeed, the islands I represent have shown themselves to be pioneering in the generation and the use of energy in ways that cut emissions and lead us towards net zero. Of course, achieving this in relation to heat, as with transport, remains one of the biggest challenges we face. But that's why this bill, which Scottish Liberal Democrats strongly support, is so crucial, and why I think the point that Claudia Beamish made about the adequate resourcing of the provisions of this bill is also well made. The Orkney example also illustrates the tension within the bill between national oversight and local delivery, and I appreciate that the consent process needs to ensure the right projects in the right places. Ensure too a proper balance between our environmental objectives and efforts to reduce fuel poverty. But communities and local authorities must have a formal role in the planning and consenting of schemes. Without that, public buy-in, I think, does become difficult. As Cass and others point out, it can also lead to decisions being taken that either ignore or override the interests of local residents, some of whom may themselves be vulnerable. And given the higher levels of fuel poverty in our island and rural areas, this is a bill whose provisions demand rigorous island and rural proofing. As various witnesses made clear to the committee, this needs to avoid overly bureaucratic regulation, but also ensure that access to the same low energy prices is available to customers across Scotland. Denmark has made a success of a decentralised process, and as others observed, there's no reason why Scotland can and should not do the same. So I welcome the Minister's assurances about transferring consenting power to local councils, if we wish it, and requiring meaningful engagement by developers with local communities. So I think, again, I was struck by Andy Whiteman's position in relation to a presumption, which is certainly the approach that was taken in terms of planning for aquaculture development. So there is a precedent there. On the theme of island proofing, could the Minister also agree to investigate why Shetland Heat and Power's treatment in terms of rates appears at odds with projects elsewhere in Scotland? This may not fall to his ministerial responsibility, but if it doesn't, I'm sure my colleague Beatrice Wishart, as well as Shetland Heat and Power, would welcome some clarification around that. In terms of definitions and licensing, the bill makes sensible proposals, and I would certainly echo the benefits in having a consistent approach across the UK, which would point to Ofgem being the obvious choice as a licensing authority. On the question of conditions, however, I think we can be more bold in this bill. This can be done under the guise of consumer advice devolved to this Parliament. I see no reason why the bill should not include more detail on licence conditions, such as information about service, price, customer engagement, minimum standards, but more importantly, Citizens Advice Scotland, Energy Action Scotland and the Ombudsman see no reason either. Deputy Presiding Officer, during the passage of the Climate Change Act, Scottish Liberal Democrats worked with others to deliver important amendments prioritising action on heat networks. In this bill, we believe that setting stretching targets again is the right approach and best way of achieving those ambitions, as WWF and others have argued. I look forward to working with the committee and the Minister and his officials to make the necessary improvements at stage 2 and confirm once again that the Scottish Liberal Democrats will be happy to vote in support of the Heat Networks Bill at this decision time this evening. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ms MacArthur. Open debate. Call John Mason to be followed by Edward Mountain. Mr Mason, please.
Thank you very much, Presiding Officer. I think we face a number of challenges around heat, and that certainly includes the need to decarbonise heat and the fuel poverty which many of our constituents face. Heat networks, and in particular district heating systems, definitely have a big part to play in this. At the same time, in passing, I would just say I do hope that we continue working on hydrogen as an option, if possible using the existing gas pipework. I find it tremendously exciting to hear about the H100 pilot project in Fife, but I accept that a lot of the technology around hydrogen is still at a relatively early stage of development. I've been in the Economy, Energy and Fair Work Committee on and off since 2011, and I was hugely impressed some time ago when we visited the St Andrews University district heating system with its heat production in Guard Bridge, which is some 4.6 miles away from most of the university buildings. The network is about 10.6 kilometres in length, and frankly, I had not realised that hot water could be transferred so far with so little loss in temperature. And I suspect I'm not so unusual in that, in not fully understanding the systems. The committee did find that there was a bit of a disconnect between the undoubted public support for climate reduction measures and at the same time a lack of awareness of the role of heat. For some of us, when district heating is mentioned, as Andy Whiteman has already said, we perhaps think of some Soviet-era, hugely inefficient system leaking steam and heat all over the place and with little or no control for the individual household. Whereas in fact a modern district heating system is something completely different. In the Government's response to paragraph 143 of the committee report, it refers to a report entitled Public Awareness of and Attitudes to Low-Carbon Heating Technologies. The findings include that the two main factors which put people off low-carbon heating systems are 1, the expected cost, and 2, uncertainty about performance. I guess that this will gradually be overcome as these systems become more common and so more people have them themselves, or at least know other people who have them and who are benefiting from district heating. In my own constituency, the Commonwealth Games Village was an extremely desirable housing development with a mix of owner-occupiers and social rented housing. Of course, it was built to a higher than normal specification and subsidised, so it was very attractive to prospective residents. And I suspect most of them moved in despite the district heating system rather than because of it. We had various complaints early on, especially about the charging system. And at least to start with, the heating charges were just set to match traditional heating costs because the operators did not know what the actual costs like long-term maintenance would be. I do not think we've had any complaints about it recently. However, the hope obviously is that heat networks can be one way of reducing fuel costs and therefore fuel poverty. So I welcome the government response to paragraphs 131 and 132 in the report to make this more explicit on the face of the bill. Related to that is how we deal with existing heat networks. When the new licensing system comes into play, the committee raised this topic in paragraph 86. And I welcome the government's response, which talks about possible exemptions, which could be time-limited, exclusion or modification of licensing conditions, or the adaptation of fees. Andy Whiteman was particularly concerned that local authorities or communities should be as involved as possible with district heating, and I have a lot of sympathy with that. Therefore, I welcome the government commitment to bring forward an amendment at stage 2 to enable responsibility for the award of heat network consents to be transferred to local authorities if they wish. There's a lot more that could be said, for example, about an obligation to connect and other issues, but I will leave it at that. Like the rest of the committee, I'm very happy to support the general principles of this bill. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr Mason. I call Edward Mountain to be followed by Richard Lyle. Mr Mountain, please.
Thank you very much, Presiding Officer, and I'd like to refer members to my register of interest. It's interesting joining this debate as somebody who has not been involved in the process during the committee, but I have watched and read some of the information that's come out. And during my professional career as a chartered surveyor, I've witnessed the emergence of heating networks, and I've seen the practical benefits that they can bring. As we all know, individual boilers take up significant places in homes and offices. Connecting up a heating network means you can remove not only the boiler, but the relevant alarms and the need for annual safety inspections. And overall health and safety can be improved because the risk of fires and carbon monoxide poisoning are reduced and eliminated too. I believe it is time for heating networks to be expanded, especially as the early adopters of these schemes have shown real promise. For example, in the Highlands, the Wick District Heating Scheme has been blazing the trail when it comes to delivering renewable and affordable energy. It is this energy which powers Caithness General Hospital, Pulteney Distillery, Wick Assembly Rooms and homes owned by Cairn Housing Association. Providing these schemes are reliable and provide a sustainable source of heat for homes and businesses and for our health service too. While Wick is leading the way, I think Scotland has been falling behind when it comes to expanding these heating networks. Estimates suggest, I believe, that only 1% of Scotland's total heat demand is met by heating networks, and therefore Scotland has a long way to go when we compare ourselves to Denmark, where we've heard that 63% of households are powered by heating networks, or Finland, where it accounts to 50% of the total heating market. I truthfully believe the government has missed a trick in not legislating sooner for heating networks, and therefore I'm pleased to see that this is now gathering momentum. I think it was this government that promised in 2013 to create a licensing body for heating networks, something that has not yet been delivered. Had they done so, the industry could have accelerated expansion and helped towards reducing the carbon emissions and household bills even more. That is a 7-year delay, and in 7 years I think to myself how much heat has been generated by distilleries in Speyside and squandered and pumped back into the rivers, increasing river temperatures by 2 or 3 degrees. Yes, I will. Minister.
Minister?
I'm grateful to the member for taking an intervention. I won't take much of his time. I very much agree with him about the need for pace on this, and I'm not disagreeing with that at all. I would just merely highlight, both for the UK Government and ourselves, and indeed colleagues in Northern Ireland, we have obviously had the need to emerge with a framework around consumer protection which works for all different parts of the UK. And that's not to criticise, but it's obviously a very important part of what we've been discussing today, which I hope he appreciates.
Mr Mountain.
And Minister, thanks for that, and I agree. And whoever's slowing it down, or wherever the slowness is, I'll criticise everyone, because I think this is a great scheme, as we've heard this afternoon. Now, I believe the Economy, Energy and Fair Work Committee have report identified there are no formal roles for communities and local authorities in the planning and consent for these networks, and I'm pleased to hear that the Minister has taken steps to change that, because local democracy is an essential part of the planning process and it can never be undermined, and local communities should be involved at all levels. Presiding Officer, reducing emissions and meeting Scotland's climate change targets requires a mix of renewable energy solutions. Heating networks have a key role to play in this, and I'm delighted that my party, and it appears all the other parties, are supporting the general principle of this bill, a bill which I believe is long overdue.
Thank you very much, Mr Mountain. I call Richard Lyle to be followed by Daniel Johnson. Mr Lyle, please.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. Can I begin, as ever, by welcoming the opportunity to contribute to this important debate on the Heat Networks Scotland Bill. Presiding Officer, Scotland, and by extension this Scottish Government, have a proud record on taking action, world-leading action, to address climate change and tackle fuel poverty. This bill paves the way for even greater action on those priorities, because in doing so, Scotland will be the first country in the United Kingdom to legislate on the development of heat networks to help meet climate change targets and tackle fuel poverty. The Heat Networks Scotland Bill will introduce regulation and a licensing system for district and communal heating to accelerate use of networks across Scotland. As many will know, district or communal networks deliver heat from a central source through insulated pipes to local homes and other buildings, and have the potential to reduce or remove emissions from heating buildings and homes right across Scotland. Heat networks are generally more efficient than individual gas boilers and can run wholly from renewable sources, reducing the need for customers to procure and maintain their own boilers. That to me is an incredible important element of this bill, that it reduces the need for customers to procure and maintain their own boilers. That is increasingly more efficient and can be run wholly from renewable sources. To shortly outline why that final element is, of course, particularly important in terms of our global obligations to our climate. In moving my remarks on, I wish to also say that as a member of the Economy, Energy and Fair Work Committee, particularly pleased that the committee has made a recommendation that the Parliament agree to the general principles of this bill, because this bill can make a difference. Presiding Officer, we are facing a global climate emergency. We must reduce our emissions associated with heating our homes and businesses if we are to achieve our aim of net zero emissions by 2040. One of the main challenges in reducing the ultimate stopping the impact from heating our homes and buildings, which is where more than half our energy we consume as a society currently goes. What we need in delivering those ambitions is clarity. We need clarity from the UK Government on the future of the gas grid to achieve this in full. And of course, in the meantime, Scotland will make full use of our devolved powers in the meantime, including the development of heat networks where they are appropriate. Heat networks will have a key role in playing in supplying Scotland's heat in the future. That's why the bill creates the circumstances needed to unlock the full potential of the sector and support its growth. It is welcome, therefore, that the proposals within the bill are being developed based on recommendations from an expert group of industry, consumer groups, local government representatives, and is in line with the statutory advice received from the Committee on Climate Change. Presiding Officer, the benefits of heat networks are not only environmental. Heat networks are often more efficient than individual fossil fuel heating systems, which I've mentioned already, and can also be run fully from renewables or recovered waste or surplus heat sources. They can allow the heat source to be changed to one compatible with Scotland's world-leading climate change targets without further disruption to the heat user. They have the capacity to reduce or remove the emissions associated with heating buildings, and the Committee on Climate Change has recommended that the heat networks should form a part of Scotland's future heat supply. They can save space, remove combustion risk within the buildings, have been shown to save householders and businesses up to 36% in fuel costs, with consequent benefits for tackling fuel poverty and reducing costs faced by businesses and public bodies. Competitions and Markets Authority, CMA, found that the cost for 90% of heat network customers were similar or less than those using gas or electricity, and the evidence gathered from impact assessments also suggests that heat networks can result in fuel savings of up to 36%. To conclude, Presiding Officer, this SNP Scottish Government has done much to support the sector in recent years. Between 800 and 1,000 heat networks are estimated to be up and running in Scotland, and the Heat Networks Bill therefore marks the beginning of a transformational change as we seek to create a supportive market environment, the necessary expansion of our heat networks, an environment which supports and helps achieve Scotland's target to deliver 11% of non-electrical heat demand for renewable sources by 2020, the Scottish Government target that 50% of all energy consumption come from renewables by 2030. Ultimately, these actions will contribute to our shared goal of dealing with our climate change emergency, creating a world we all want to see sustainable, fit for the future and for our citizens. Thank you, Presiding Officer.
Thank you. I have a little time in hand, so I'm getting quizzical looks so that if you go over your 4 minutes, I'm not upset. So we can go take a little longer if you like. Mr Johnson, I call Daniel Johnson, followed by Willie Coffey.
Thank you for that reassurance, Deputy Keever, because trust me, I think I speak on behalf of all members that we don't like upsetting you at all. And I'd just like to echo Edward Manton's comments. As a non-committee member, one can feel a little as an interloper, especially on a subject such as this. But what I would say is that any debate that can take you from Horace to skiing in Siberia is worthy of every member's consideration. But certainly this is an area that is of interest to me. I think one of the great privileges of this job is that you get introduced to areas that perhaps hitherto you hadn't been familiar with, but actually become very important to you and interesting. And certainly I'm very thankful to David Somerville and Transition Edinburgh, who very early on in this Parliament invited me to a briefing to outline the real, early progress that had been made by Edinburgh University in terms of developing heat networks. As members may or may not know, Edinburgh University has 3 combined heat and power pumps across their campus, the first one being installed in 2000. And actually, the most basic terms, what that was able to do was improve their energy efficiency by in excess of 1/3, partly through the more efficient use of the heat in terms of the power generation, but also in terms of reducing power loss by having more immediate power generation located next to where that was being consumed. That has generated savings of in excess of £1.5 million a year for Edinburgh University. But that's not the only such scheme, either in my constituency or very close to it. Slateford Green, which is a housing association development in my constituency, again, very similar time in 2000, there was a development of 60 flats, which again had a heat network built as part of that scheme. Tynecastle School, just outside my constituency, is heated using the waste energy from the Caledonian Brewery, much in line with the schemes that Edward Mountain was hinting at in terms of distilleries. And yet, I think despite this progress that we have had in Scotland, the examples and the benefits which are outlined, heat networks only provide 1% of Scotland's heating. And I think it's imperative that we do better. It's imperative that we improve our ability to heat our homes in an energy-efficient way. Quite simply, as Andy Whiteman pointed out, Scotland is cold, and therefore the fact that our CO2 emissions arising from heating our homes are 1/4 of our total emissions, as Claudia Beamish set out, is something that we have to tackle. But the improvements that we gain from efficiencies decline. Therefore, we need investment and we need infrastructure if we're going to remove gas boilers from our homes. And indeed, in our cities in particular, heat networks could be an incredibly valuable means of doing so. So this bill is welcome. It provides a framework for the construction running of heat networks. It is a necessary starting point. But I think, as has already been said in the debate, I think there is a concern that this is a sort of a permissive rather than enabling piece of legislation. And I was encouraged by the Minister setting out the range of other measures that the Scottish Government is seeking to take forward, so that this is not simply a single shot, but it is part of a suite of initiatives. But I do think that we need to go further, because I think if the Edinburgh University example points to anything, is that efficiency and carbon neutrality can go hand in hand in fuel poverty. If savings of a third can be passed down to all consumers, to all communities, that is clearly advantageous as we seek to tackle fuel poverty. And indeed, I think the convener's contributions was remarkable for a great number of reasons, not least of which I was struck by his conversion to municipal socialism. But I think the example of Denmark and the way in which these schemes work in Scandinavian countries is important. What we do not want is large corporate investment that does not pass on those benefits to our communities. These schemes work best when they are both owned and controlled by local communities. So that, of course.
Andy Whiteman.
I'm very glad the member has mentioned this. Would he agree with me that what we're seeing in countries like Denmark is an example of municipal enterprise, not socialism?
Daniel Johnson.
I think by the means of our collective endeavour, we achieve more than we do alone. And if we want to call that municipal socialism or cooperative enterprise, I don't care much. I think it sounds like a good thing. And I'm encouraged by the sentiments across the chamber from all parties that we build upon this bill and do just that. We build a means of building heat networks where all communities benefit, we tackle climate change and we tackle fuel poverty. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr Johnson. I call Willie Coffey to be followed by Dean Lockhart. Mr Coffey, please.
Thanks very much, Presiding Officer. I think Daniel Johnson's just condemned Gordon Lyndhurst to banishment there, describing him as a municipal socialist, but there we go. I welcome this chance to say a few words on the Heat Networks Bill at this stage one. Before I say anything on the bill itself, I think it's worth saying something about the public perception or the lack of perception about what this is really all about. If you talk to constituents about heat networks and why the Parliament is legislating on this here, unlikely to get a great deal of acknowledgement or even much awareness of what heat networks are and why we are doing this. And therein, I think, lies a problem for all of us as we take this forward. And we need the help of all our MSPs to start bringing these matters to the attention of our electorate. What we're talking about is a system of supplying heat, that is hot water or steam, via piped networks that connect to our houses, doing away with central heating boilers that most of us have and which burn gas to heat our homes. That's it in a nutshell, Presiding Officer, but I think we have to start the discussion with the public at large about how we and they go about all of this. The aims and the reasons behind the idea are clear enough. We face a climate emergency, as many of the members have reminded us, and we need to reduce emissions associated with our domestic homes if we're to make good progress towards our target of net zero emissions over the next 20 years. We heard during our committee's evidence sessions that half of Scotland's entire energy consumption was to create, with over 80% of all our houses dependent on gas. We've also heard that in Denmark, about 50% of their entire heat demand is met by district and local heat networks. In Scotland, it's only about 1%, similar to England, I think. But we know that Denmark started off on their journey for a variety of reasons much earlier than we were able to. So the challenge is formidable, but the prize can be even greater. Now, the bill itself is mainly technical at this stage, but it does have a number of key provisions that are essential to allow us to begin this process. It starts us off on the necessary journey of regulating the heat network sector by creating a licensing system that heat network operators will be bound by. This provides the essential protection for consumers that those operators are fit and proper companies to be delivering those services. It also creates a consent system to make sure that local factors and local assets are taken into account before approving any new developments, although there was some discussion at the committee about the extent to which the public themselves may or may not be able to give that consent. It also allows us to identify potential heat network zones that would be appropriate to establish a heat network. And amongst a few other provisions, it also requires public sector building owners to assess the potential of their estate to connect to a heat network so that we can begin to make progress there too. Some of the issues that came about were who the regulator should be for the sector, and the discussion centred around Ofgem, which of course is a statutory body established under UK legislation. I think it's fair to say that everyone, including the Scottish Government, I believe, was happy for them to provide those regulation duties for us, provided they're applying whatever Scottish ministers determine as appropriate criteria for the sector here in Scotland. There was also a bit of discussion, Presiding Officer, about licensing and the regime to be put in place and who that licensing authority should be. There was a good bit of discussion too about whether Ofgem could or should occupy both those roles and whether it would be a conflict if they did. So it would be worthwhile, I think, hearing from the Minister about further thoughts on these key duties and how we best set up and support those functions. Presiding Officer, I'll just end where I started, and that it's in the area of engagement with the public on this really important work. Local people will want to be involved and not feel that things are being done to them. We need to provide the means where local people can participate in the whole transition to heat networks and feel that their interests are at heart. They'll want to know more about how existing systems in their homes should be decommissioned and whether any support will be available to help with that transition. And people will also want to know that what we end up with is not only better for the environment, but much more efficient and cost-effective for their homes and their families. And with that, I'm happy to support the bill again at stage 1 today. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr Coffey. And I call Dean Lockhart to be followed by Colin Beattie.
Thanks very much, Deputy Presiding Officer. It is perhaps fitting that we are holding this debate when many parts of Scotland are seeing the first snow of winter. I was a member of the Economy Committee when it started gathering evidence on the Heat Networks Bill, but left the committee before the report was published, although I can confirm there is no connection between those events. So let me take this opportunity to thank the clerks for all their hard work, not only on this bill, but across a wide range of topics over the 4 years I was a member of the Economy Committee. As Gordon Linton said, this is a technical bill, and I think my colleague Alexander Burnett demonstrated that when it comes to the technical details of this bill, he knows his onions. As he said, there's a wide range of policy areas covered by this bill, including fuel poverty, climate change and the delegated powers to local authorities. And these are the areas I want to touch on briefly today. First of all, in terms of fuel poverty, the Minister has given his commitment that the fuel poverty was an absolute priority in the development of the bill. However, the evidence of Citizens Advice Scotland, I think, was compelling in terms of some of the limitations in the bill when it comes to addressing fuel poverty. They gave evidence that the bill cannot guarantee lower fuel costs for heat network consumers, as it does not have competency over pricing. They also gave evidence that the bill cannot oblige heat networks to publish their tariffs so that consumers can compare what they're paying, as gas and electricity consumers can do at the moment. And thirdly, they said that heat networks are able to provide lower cost heating, but consumers will not be guaranteed that that lower cost will be passed on for their benefit. Now, to be fair, not all of these powers are in the Minister's gift, and also in his response to the Stage 1 report and in his opening remarks today, he did undertake to consider what changes can be brought forward at Stage 2 to make the bill more explicit in terms of how heat networks can contribute to reducing fuel poverty, and that's all very welcome. I think, as other members have said, addressing this issue will be an important part of developing this bill and making it ensure it has effective outcomes. So I would encourage the Minister to carefully consider the evidence given by Citizens Advice Scotland in that area. Presiding Officer, outside of this bill, I know the Minister is working on other policy measures to address fuel poverty. However, it is now more than 3 years since we heard an announcement about the publicly owned energy company, which was announced as the primary answer to addressing fuel poverty in Scotland. So again, I know the Minister has been working hard to turn that announcement into a feasible working plan, but perhaps in his closing remarks today, he can provide us an update with respect to when we might actually see the publicly owned energy company in the near future. And for the record, and to continue the collegiate nature of this debate, I'm not holding the Minister himself wholly responsible for the delays in this policy, because I suspect this policy announcement was cobbled together by a special advisor to grab headlines for the programme for government when it was announced. Perhaps the Minister can confirm if that was the case. Presiding Officer, the second area of concern I want to highlight is the support that local authorities will require to implement the legislation. Paragraph 181 of the report rightly states that the importance of the role of local authorities should not be underestimated in delivering targets. And the Minister told the committee that he does want to strike a right balance between local authorities having the necessary powers and giving them the necessary resources. There was a significant number of respondents who gave feedback in the consultation who suggested that local authorities lacked the necessary resources and the necessary expertise to deliver the proposed target set out for heat networks. And in their written evidence to the committee, Glasgow and Highland Councils warned that care must be taken not to overload local authorities in delivering targets. So let me conclude on that point, Deputy Presiding Officer. Local authorities have done a tremendous job in responding to the COVID crisis. And I think we would all encourage the Minister to make sure that local authorities have all the necessary additional support, resources and expertise required to implement these proposals. Presiding Officer, I'm happy to support the general principles at stage one. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr Lockhart. And I call Colin Beattie to be followed by Bob Doris. You're on mute, Mr Beattie. I think you're on mute. While we're waiting for things to be sorted out, you read, can I get Bob Doris, please? Can I call Bob Doris? Mr Doris, thank you.
Just to be able to paying attention there, Presiding Officer, thank you. I'm pleased to speak in this debate to highlight the very real opportunities that licensing of heat networks, which is a central aspect of this bill, can do to boost consumer protection. And the rest of those that I've got a direct constituency interest in these matters. In November 2019, the Minister, Paul Wheelhouse MSP, visited Maryhill to hear about the issues local residents were having in the Wynford estate in my constituency. Indeed, it's referenced in para 133 of the committee report, the issues within the Wynford estate. Households in Wynford received their heating and hot water through a heat network. Such households have less protection than energy customers. That's clear. My office had been contacted by many households who were about to be disconnected or were seeking to get their supply reconnected. Residents had been cut off by SSE due to, often disputed it has to be said, arrears for heating and hot water costs, and what should have been a flagship scheme. There were issues around SSE's punitive £274 reconnection fee and the high levels of upfront payments required by SSE, routinely around 50% of debt owed before a household could be reconnected. Now, in the run-up to Christmas 2018, my office, along with Glasgow North West Citizens Advice Bureau, secured some reconnections by persuading SSE to show that flexibility, and I warmly welcome the actions that SSE took at that time. At its height, there were 121 households disconnected. That dropped to 46. I very much hope the licensing regime contained within this bill, along with the wider UK consumer protection framework we've heard much about this afternoon, can underpinned by the licensing regime, can drive up consumer experience so that the situation that happened in the Wynford estate does not happen in the future. I do want to be clearer as to how that can happen and what needs to be on the face of this bill to drive those expectations also. One of the key issues customers in Wynford faced is they did accrue debt on a daily basis through standing charges, even if they never used the heating or hot water provision. Low usage households were also particularly impacted. SSE were persuaded to introduce a low user, low income tariff without daily standing charges. It wasn't ideal, but it was better than went before. There was also too narrow a definition of what constitutes a vulnerable household. SSE again extended that criteria to include households with children under 5. I should pay tribute, and I want to pay tribute to the Wynford Tenants Union, who also persuaded SSE to increase the usage threshold for which the residents could qualify for that low user tariff. And again, they were able to drive further provisions on what would allow the criteria to access that tariff. I am very keen to ensure there is suitable regulation and levers of influence within this legislation and the licensing regime so that, for example, reconnection fees are not a barrier to constituents having their heating and hot water reconnected, nor unreasonable repayment plans from companies. More importantly, we shouldn't be seeing disconnections in the first place, of course. There needs to be a fair and consistent approach to protecting vulnerable groups. Standing charges accrued daily for users for such heat networks, and we should remind ourselves they also pay standing charges for electricity, for example, must not penalise users more generally, and certainly not low user, low income households, as they can do. I know the committee on Para 135 of its bill, of its stage 1 report rather, presiding officer, wants to be clear about what can be on the face of this bill to drive that kind of change. That's the kind of change that means I am hugely supportive of this legislation, but I want to be very, very clear about how it will improve the lot of constituents in the Wynford estate, in my constituency and across Scotland for existing heat networks, not just driving more heat networks that, of course, we all want to see, presiding officer.
Thank you very much. And I now call Colin Beattie, and Mr Beattie will be the last speaker in the open debate. Mr Beattie, please.
Thank you, presiding officer. Tackling our need to decarbonise heating systems must be a major priority for us all. And to date, we've been fairly successful in decarbonising our electricity needs through wind farms and other renewable sources. But a comprehensive solution to decarbonising our heating has been much more elusive. We're facing a global climate emergency, and we need to think of innovative ways to reduce the emissions associated with heating our homes. Heat networks will have a key role to play in supplying Scotland's homes with heat in the future. And that's why we need to focus on unlocking the potential of this sector and supporting its growth. Heat networks have a huge potential to reduce our carbon emissions and provide a more efficient, environmentally friendly way of heating our homes. And I was happy to take part in the Economy, Energy and Fair Work Committee's evidence-taking in this key area. And this is a subject close to my heart, since I've long advocated making better use of our natural resources in order to provide the energy needed to run our heating systems. And I'll have a quick plug here for my own constituency of Midlothian North and Musselburgh, where we have an abundance of flooded mine shafts, which create the opportunity to develop geothermal energy from the water contained in them, and to provide my constituency both with jobs and relatively cheap heating sources. But I do have one or two points I'd like to highlight arising from the evidence which the committee has been taking. Firstly, looking at the likely landscape for the opportunity to develop local heat networks, I think we need to consider carefully the likely case that a variety of different designs and technologies will arise, depending on heat source and the mode of extraction. And it's vitally important that all these designs and technologies actually are capable of talking to each other and integrating at a national level. While we're talking local heat networks, it's important that they do not operate in isolation. The committee had concerns as to the regulatory framework, and we would need to consider whether there would need to be a Scottish regulator or whether Ofgem could modify to take up the task. And I think that's still got to be resolved. Effectively, companies investing in local heat networks would enjoy a virtual monopoly, which might last as long as 20 or even 40 years as they recover their costs. I would emphasise the importance to consumers that there be some sort of monitoring in place or price matching system, which would ensure value for money and prevent excessive price hikes. Fuel poverty is a real concern and likely to feature more prominently given our current economic situation. Evidence from impact assessments show that heat networks can lead to fuel savings of up to 36%. There are already many Scottish Government investments in this, such as the Heat Networks Early Adopter Challenge Fund, and we need to ensure funds such as this are being utilised to support the transition to achieving net zero emissions by 2040. I was pleased to hear the undertaking from the Minister in relation to his commitment that local councils and local communities would be completely involved in the development of heat networks. And given the likely impact on local employment, the environment and energy supplies, there needs to be a solid local buy-in for these projects to be a success. And I don't mean the contrived local consultations that have been the norm in some places. We need to have consultations which actively promote participation. I foresee difficulties in implementing local heat networks where multiple landowners and stakeholders with conflicting interests are involved. There does then exist the possibility of compulsion, but I'm somewhat ambivalent whether this is the best route to take in the interests of the wider community. There is an attraction in resolving issues in this way, but it can also create hostility and real problems among local residents. Perhaps a form of statutory negotiation with the backup position of compulsion might be the best solution. Here we might need to consider the position where, as is all too often the case, there's no clear ownership of a necessary piece of land, in which case either compulsory way leaves or purchase is an obvious solution. Overall, I think the committee carried out a thorough and comprehensive investigation into local heatworks, which is particularly commendable given the disruptions caused by COVID-19 and its fallout. I know the Scottish Government has been keen to review all the points raised with it, and that this will result in effective and workable legislation which will enable Scotland to take the lead in developing the abundance of opportunity which is available. Presiding Officer, I'm happy to support the bill at stage 1 today.
Thank you, Mr Beattie. I now call on Lewis MacDonald to close for Labour. Mr MacDonald, please.
Thank you very much. As members have said, the Heat Network Scotland Bill is a welcome and indeed a long-awaited development. Today's debate has shown that there is broad support for the general principles of the bill, and there is also consensus that it will need to be amended substantially if it is to achieve the desired results, and I am glad the Minister has acknowledged that so clearly today. Local councils already play a number of roles in relation to district heating, whether as investors in networks, as customers or landlords of customers, or as partners with either commercial or not-for-profit network operators. The bill gives councils new responsibilities, and it is important to get these right from the start. And I'm glad that there now appears to be broad agreement that councils should be consenting authorities if they wish to be so. And they are, of course, also critical to delivering the engagement of the communities they represent. The bill rightly promotes carbon reduction and increased energy efficiency, key policy objectives, but currently makes no mention of fuel poverty. It is therefore welcome that the Government is intent on embedding the tackling of fuel poverty in parts of the bill, and the bill should indeed go beyond merely mentioning it, but actually and positively encourage heat networks to be designed expressly to address fuel poverty. Evidence to the committee at stage 1 proposed that tackling fuel poverty should be a statutory consideration for local councils in deciding whether and where to designate heat network zones, and I hope that is one of the areas the Minister is looking at in terms of addressing fuel poverty in the bill. Carbon reduction and increased energy efficiency must go hand in hand with fuel poverty reduction if we are to achieve a just transition to a low-carbon economy, and the opportunity this bill offers to put all of those objectives on an equal footing should not be missed. The bill requires the availability of waste heat and renewable sources of energy to be taken into account. Those, of course, are not the only possible options. If we succeed in putting new heat networks in place, they will undoubtedly help Scotland meet the challenge of climate change. First, we need to get the networks built. Once they are there, in the ground and in people's homes, the source of energy and the technology employed can be changed at source without disruption to the end user, unlike more conventional technologies like gas central heating. A huge amount of investment is already being made in hydrogen, for example, in the northeast of Scotland and elsewhere, in the hope that it can replace hydrocarbons in the existing gas grid. Hydrogen may be a key fuel for future heating networks too, although it's not there yet. The bill must not get in the way of that or of any other switch in fuel in future by over-specifying what types of sources should be taken into account in designating and developing heat heat network zones in the short term. The economics of network development also require a degree of certainty before the pipework is put in place and the investment is made. If a network is built up to the perimeter of a potential anchor load building, there is currently no obligation on the operator of that building to connect, even if it is in a designated heat network zone. That lack of obligation potentially creates a high level of risk for the network operator. And as Michael King of Aberdeen Heat and Power told the committee, there should at least be an obligation on owners of anchor load buildings to explain the reasons if they choose not to connect. Such a statutory obligation would certainly concentrate the mind. The bill can and should address the issue of community engagement. Network customers rely on the efficiency and prudence of their network operator as things currently stand. Where networks are built as purely commercial undertakings, which is clearly envisaged, there is an obvious risk that the interests of the operators and those of their customers could diverge over time. As Ombudsman Services have suggested, Claudia Beamish and Liam MacArthur both mentioned this too, better accountability of operators to customers is an alternative approach and could be achieved through requiring the provision of consumer advice, distinct from consumer protection, and could make provision of a licence, such provision a licence condition for new network operators. Presiding Officer, I have followed the fortunes of Aberdeen Heat and Power since it was set up as a not-for-profit company in 2002 with a mission to reduce fuel poverty and to cut carbon emissions. It supplies over 3,000 tenants in 50 high-rise blocks and many public buildings besides, making AHP the largest operator of its kind, not just in Scotland, but anywhere in the UK. Clarity about the impact of the bill on existing networks is therefore important, but the bill will also allow other parts of Scotland to follow that lead, and so it is to be welcomed. It can also be improved upon, and I look forward, as does Labour, we look forward to that being done as the bill proceeds through Parliament. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr MacDonald. I call on Graham Simpson to close for the Conservatives. Mr Simpson, please.
Thank you very much. Well, I'm glad I turned up today because this has been a very interesting debate indeed, and perhaps on the face of it you might not have expected that, but there's been some very interesting contributions, and I thank everyone who's taken part. We started with Gordon Lyndhurst gushing like mad about the Minister. We'll have to have words with Mr Lyndhurst about that. Mr Lyndhurst, we discovered, has a new role as a municipal socialist, and I would suggest that perhaps Mr Lyndhurst takes his next holiday with Andy Whiteman to Russia, and I'm sure the two comrades would make a very happy couple. Well, if yes, indeed.
Daniel Johnson.
I just wonder if the member would clarify if he's proposing sending his colleague to the Gulag, because it sounds rather like it.
Yes, Graham Simpson, please.
Yeah, well, it's often been suggested, actually, about Mr Lyndhurst. I think no. I think we've had enough. Well, go on then.
I mean,
Gordon Lyndhurst.
I think the assumption is that we're not in a gulag already.
Graham Simpson.
Right. Well, we'll get serious now, shall we? I was very struck by the contribution of Alexander Burnett, because I think it's really good to hear from somebody who's actually got hands-on experience of heat networks. And I do hope the Minister listens to Mr Burnett. He should consider him a critical friend, I think. I think he's genuinely trying to be positive in his contribution. So we've heard about the bill. It was introduced on March the 2nd. It provides for a regulatory and licensing system for district and communal heating to accelerate its use in Scotland. And that would be a good thing. But you can easily see how there could be issues for consumers if there isn't regulatory backup. So the bill is inherently a good idea, but as Citizens Advice Scotland have said, it is limited in what it can do. There are currently very limited consumer protections in place for heat network consumers, and consumer protection powers are currently reserved to the UK Government. The Scottish Government, therefore, cannot legislate for these, but it can introduce a licensing system. Now, I've thought about this a lot in regard to buyers of newly built homes, they too have few protections if things go wrong. People do need to be protected, so it's encouraging the UK government is considering a framework for consumer protections in this area, and they need to get on with it. Because once you're signed up to a heat network, you could be tied into a provider for a long time. You're essentially off-grid, unable to switch supplier if the price gets too high, or you aren't happy with the service, and Claudia Beamish mentioned that issue. So what does the bill actually do? We've heard it's a pretty hefty bill, but there are 7 parts to it. I'll just go through them quickly because nobody has yet. Part 1 provides key definitions, sets out a requirement for a heat network's licence, and makes it an offence to supply thermal energy through a heat network without a relevant licence. Part 2 establishes the heat network consent process for specific projects. Part 3 places a duty on councils to consider undertaking the designation of heat network zones. Part 4 builds on the designation of heat network zones by allowing ministers to award a heat network zone permit. Part 5 places a duty on public sector building owners to assess the viability of connecting their building to a heat network. Part 6 provides heat network licence holders with various special rights and powers. And Part 7 requires ministers to identify the key assets of each heat network consent application they receive. So heat networks have the potential to play a significant role in green recovery and a just transition. As I said at the start, there were a number of really good contributions from members. I slightly joked about Mr. Whiteman's visit to the Soviet Union, but he did see at first hand the heat networks there, and he rightly commented in his contribution about fuel poverty. Liam MacArthur mentioned the pioneering work that's been done in Orkney and the islands. John Mason mentioned his constituency experience in the Commonwealth Village. Edward Mountain talked about the benefits of not having a boiler, and that was also mentioned by Richard Lyle. And Daniel Johnson, who's always interesting to listen to, talked about Edinburgh University, the heat networks there, and others in the city. Bob Doris, thankfully minus his moustache, talked about the problems that constituents had when they got disconnected from heat network, and that's clearly a potential issue. The committee raised a number of questions with the Minister, which the Minister has responded to positively, and I can see that there will be a lot of work at stage 2. I'll be on the committee dealing with that. So there is work to be done, but we welcome the general principles of the bill, and I look forward to dealing with it in conjunction with other members and the Minister at stage 2. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr Simpson. I call on Paul Wheelhouse to close to the Scottish Government. Minister, please.
Thank you very much, Presiding Officer, and I would like to thank all members for their contributions to the debate today, and indeed particularly thank Gordon Linders for probably ending my career by being so praiseworthy in the earlier part of his speech. I would like to use my closing remarks to respond to a number of the points made by the Chamber today, as well as set out our intended approach to the remaining stages of the bill and beyond, should Parliament agree to the general principles today, which I'm grateful to see looks likely. But first, I would just like to briefly recap on the need for this bill, and also just make the point that I appreciate there are challenges in delivering the bill, and there's a number of issues which we are addressing collectively and constructively with members across the Chamber. But we shouldn't forget that this Parliament is taking on quite a task. It's a complex area. We've all agreed, including Mr Burnett, who's delivering heat networks, that this is badly needed, and that we are the first to be taking this forward through the parliamentary process. Not to say other administrations across the UK are not looking at this, they are clearly, but we are in some ways trialling this and getting through some measures which hopefully will benefit others thereafter. But it's a real chance to unlock and enhance the latent potential of heat networks sector in Scotland, as we've heard today, And I would certainly agree and repeat that with Richard Lyle, who made the point about this, that we've had fantastic input from a expert working group and our stakeholders in shaping this bill. So it's not purely about myself as someone who doesn't benefit from a heat network or having not built one, but we have benefited from those who benefit from heat networks and build them. So we have been taking on board experience, lived experience, if you like, of those in the sector. And it is absolutely necessary that this bill happens. Currently, only around 1.5% of properties in Scotland are connected to a heat network, as we've heard. There are some tremendous examples around Scotland. We've heard some great ones from Daniel Johnson, John Mason, Lewis MacDonald, and I know Mr Stewart, Kevin Stewart, colleague, is very familiar with Aberdeen Heat and Power, who's filled me in on that previously. So there are some great examples around the country, and I was really struck by the ones that Daniel Johnson cited around Edinburgh University, because it's not just about domestic projects. It's obviously benefiting a major institution in Scotland's capital, and indeed great to hear about the savings that have been made for the university going back into education and bringing back public benefits. But we have to do better, as I think all administrations across the UK would agree. And this bill is therefore essential to provide the framework to do that. We know that renewable and low-carbon heat networks are one of the technologies that we'll need to install in order to remove the emissions caused by heating in our buildings. And Willie Coffey cited correctly the figure that over half the energy we consume is required to provide heat. And we know we'll need to have a particular focus on these systems in the remainder of this decade in order to contribute to the interim targets set in the Climate Change Emission Reduction Targets Act of last year. Denmark's experience has been cited by a number of members, including Andy Whiteman and Willie Coffey. We know the trigger for their massive expansion of heat networks was the energy crisis in the early part of the 70s. Now, we don't face an energy crisis, we face a climate crisis now, so hopefully that need to act quickly will help us power forward and develop heat networks at pace. I think it will be challenging, I need to be honest with Parliament, to achieve the levels of coverage that Denmark have. There are a number of geographic and demographic reasons why that will be very challenging, but we can, I think, outperform the 17% upper end of the range that's been cited, but that will require concerted action from all parties. I am very pleased to note the broad agreement we've heard in today's debate about the role that heat networks in this bill in particular can play, and I believe the bill has, as I say, the potential to be an example of an area in which our Parliament as a collective can come together to support a shared objective and do a good job in doing so. In this spirit, I very much welcome the very helpful Stage 1 reports that the Economy, Energy and Fair Work Committee has published on the bill, and we have genuinely endeavoured to take on its recommendations, and including through commitments to amend the bill, and I'm really pleased that that has been welcomed by members today. I trust the changes that I have outlined at the beginning of this debate in our response to the report are welcomed also by stakeholders too. And I said in my opening statement, I want this to be a bill we can all be proud of, and I genuinely mean that. So I'm happy to provide any opportunities to cooperate with members, any constructive suggestions they have to strengthen the bill, to benefit from those who have experience of developing and delivering networks, but also to hear from other members who are concerned about fuel poverty, local engagement, community awareness, other matters that have been raised today. And I've listened closely to the issues that have been raised today, and I'll try and respond to a few of them in the time I have available to me. But one of the main issues that was raised in the Chamber today is around local and community involvement in decision-making. Colin Beattie, John Mason, Lee MacArthur, Andy Whiteman, Ed Mountain, Claudia Beamish, Dean Lockhart, Lewis MacDonald all mentioned this, and apologies if I've missed anyone off. It's one of the most important issues that's been raised today, and as introduced, local authorities will be able to designate heat network zones within their local areas in a measure which one witness in written evidence described as the biggest enabling feature within the bill. But I note the committee's desire for balance of powers between Scottish ministers and local government to be modified over time, and we are intending to do that. But we should state our starting point for developing the bill was largely influenced by the situation in Norway, which is a more centralised model, but we are listening to Parliament and to the aspirations of Parliament here, and we are reflecting that in our approach going forward. The points raised in the debate re-emphasise the importance of this issue, and as set out in my opening statement, we intend to amend the bill at stage 2 in response. Alongside this, we've committed to introducing an amendment which will require developers to submit evidence of real engagement alongside a heat network consent application with powers for the Scottish Ministers to issue guidance on effective community engagement. And I hope members can see my commitment to further strengthen local involvement in decision-making within the regulatory system. Fuel poverty has been referenced by many members today, very important issue, and recognise that. I'd firstly like to assure members that whilst the bill, as I introduced, does not explicitly reference fuel poverty on the face of the bill, it is absolutely our intention that the heat network development should be deployed to help eradicate fuel poverty in Scotland where possible. And indeed, I think in that respect, it was also discussed around not-for-profit by Andy Whiteman. I think Daniel Johnson and indeed Dean Lockhart was asking about Public Energy Company. And I can say in respect of that, we are continuing to work on the Public Energy Company. Actually, some of the issues that have been reflected today are very much issues we're now trying to take on board. Changing the utilities market, rather than preparing a company to deliver today's utility market, we're looking at heat as a service, potentially a role for a public energy company to provide heat networks as well. So I give a commitment, we are still working on this issue and we are taking that very seriously, but I will happy to engage with members further on that matter as time goes forward. I would like to also just identify that we'd be happy to provide details of the work we are doing with the Scottish Fuel Poverty Advisory Panel in developing the relevant amendments to tackle fuel poverty and put it in relevant sections of the bill and to engage with members who've got a strong interest in that as we go forward prior to stage 2. On consumer protection, I can just check with the presiding officer how much time I have left.
How much are you asking for?
As much as I can get, but
give you a minute.
All right. Well, in that case, I will not be able to, unfortunately, respond to some of the points that have been raised, but we'll certainly come back on issues about the real rights issue that's been raised by Gordon Lyndhurst. We're certainly making steps in terms of amendment to the bill to try and address that, but there are issues therein around ensuring that we don't take a disproportionate approach that actually provides a deterrent a cost deterrent to projects taking place. And so we are taking an approach working with Registers of Scotland to ensure that licence holders would be required to make information on network leave rights, way leave rights publicly available, and we can commit to consultation how this requirement would be implemented to ensure that views of all interested parties may be heard in what is potentially a very complex area. But, Presiding Officer, I hope these and other comments I've given earlier on can give confidence to Parliament. We are listening to stakeholders and members of this Parliament around the provisions of the bill. I'd like to take an opportunity just to say how we will plan secondary legislation, if I may, just to say that we don't intend to preempt the parliamentary process, but we have begun initial work to inform the development of regulations so to put in place this new regulatory system as quickly as possible and so as to support deployment and investment in the sector should the bill be passed by Parliament. And our response to the Stage 1 report sets out further detail on that work. In conclusion, I just hope that these remarks are helpful to members at this time. I will try and communicate with members more about the issues that have been raised today and reiterate my commitment to meet with interested members ahead of Stage 2 to allow a further opportunity for discussing the provisions of the bill. And when considering your support for the general principles of the bill, I'd ask members to have this commitment in mind as the two crucial issues that the bill seeks to address are climate change and fuel poverty. And in the meantime, again, thank members for their generous remarks today and their supportive contributions in the debate. I hope the bill is something all members can feel they can get behind and that you will vote in favour of the motions as drafted. I therefore invite members to support me in agreeing to the principles of the Heat Network Scotland Bill and move to detailed consideration at Stage 2. Thank you, Presiding Officer.
Thank you very much, Minister. And that concludes the Stage 1 debate on Heat Network Scotland Bill. And it's time to move on to the next item of business, which is consideration of motion 23140 on a financial resolution for the Heat Network Scotland Bill financial resolution. I call on Ben McPherson to move the motion, please.
Formally moved, Presiding Officer.
Thank you. The question of this motion will be put at decision time. Next item of business is consideration of two Parliamentary Bureau motions, and I ask Miles Briggs on behalf of the Parliamentary Bureau to move motions 23574 and 23589 on committee membership.
Formally moved, Deputy Presiding Officer.
Thank you. The questions on these motions will also be put at decision time, to which we now come. There are 4 questions being put as a result of today's business. The first question is that motion 23014 in the name of Christine Graham on the Solicitors and the Supreme Courts of Scotland Amendment Bill be agreed. And as this is a bill, we have to move to a vote, so I suspend the meeting to allow members to access the digital voting system. Thank you. That's broadcasting back on. We start proceedings. So, the question is that motion 23014 in the name of Christine Graham on this list as in the Supreme Courts of Scotland Amendment Bill be agreed. And I'd ask you to vote now, please. That's the vote now closed. Thank you. 109 votes yes. There were no abstentions and no votes against. Accordingly, the motion is therefore agreed and the Supreme Courts of Scotland Amendment Bill is passed. The next question is that motion 23564 in the name of Paul Wheelhouse on the Heat Network Scotland Bill be agreed. Are we agreed? The motion is therefore agreed. Third question is that the motion 23140 in the name of Kate Forbes on Heat Network Scotland Bill Financial Resolution be agreed. Are we agreed? Yes. The motion is therefore agreed. Fourth question. I propose to ask a single question on two Parliamentary Bureau motions. If any member objects, please say so now. No member has objected. Therefore, the question is that motions 23574 and 23589 in the name of Graham Day on behalf of the Parliamentary Bureau be agreed. Are we agreed? The motion is therefore agreed. That concludes decision time and I close this meeting.